4 years into our marriage, I'd have told anyone we were happy. Clara and I were the kind of couple people looked at and saw as a picture of stability. We laughed often, worked hard, and supported each other's dreams. She had her flower shop, tucked away on a cobblestone street in Charleston, its windows filled with vibrant arrangements that seemed to bloom with her personality. I had my architectural firm, a modest but growing business that demanded long hours but gave me a sense of purpose. Our home, a small but charming brownstone, was filled with little touches of Clara's creativity. The kitchen smelled of lavender she'd grown in the garden, and our evenings were spent on the patio with a bottle of wine, watching the sky turn shades of gold and pink. There was an ease to our life together that I thought would never change. All of the while, but lately something felt off, like a splinter I couldn't find but could feel every time I moved. Clara's laughter was quieter, her touch hesitant. She'd started coming home later than usual, offering explanations that didn't quite align with the gentle rhythms of her work life. I'd told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things. "Do you want to join me at the shop this weekend?" Clara asked one evening as she set down her wine glass. Her voice was casual, but she didn't meet my eyes. "Sure," I said. "What's going on?" "Oh, just some inventory stuff. I thought it'd be nice to have your help." It was the kind of thing she used to ask regularly, but now her tone carried a hint of hesitation. I nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I wanted to believe her, to believe us. That weekend came and went without me stepping into the shop. Clara left early Saturday morning, claiming there was too much work for her to drag me along. I didn't push it, but something about her abruptness lingered. She returned late that evening, her usual energy replaced with something muted. She smiled as she walked through the door, but it was thin, a shade of what I'd grown used to. "Long day?" I asked, standing at the counter, a glass of water in my hand. "Meh," she said, kicking off her shoes. "You wouldn't believe how much stock we had to reorganize. It was chaos." Strangely, she noticed his grimace. She brushed past me, planting a kiss on my cheek. It was quick and light, gone before I could even register it. I wanted to ask more, to probe deeper, but something in her posture stopped me. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts I hated having. I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was slipping away, that there was something she wasn't saying. Then came 2 days later, on March 12th. It started like any other. Dinner on the patio, candles flickering in the warm breeze. Clara was quiet, pushing her food around her plate more than eating it. I watched her, searching for an opening to ask what was weighing on her mind, but the words felt stuck in my throat. Finally, she looked up, her eyes hesitant but steady. "Aiden," she began, her voice soft. "Yeah?" She set her fork down and folded her hands in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About me. About..." The knot in my stomach tightened. "It's not that I don't love you," she said quickly, as if rushing to reassure me. "I do. You have to know that. But I feel like I've lost a part of myself along the way. I don't know who I am outside of this life we've built." I blinked, trying to process her words. "What are you saying?" Her lips curled slightly. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I need to figure that out. And I think the only way to do that is to explore." Oh, her shoulders tensed at the edge in my voice. "I don't mean leave," she said. "I don't want to leave. I think we should consider opening our marriage." For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of cicadas in the distance, the hum of the city alive around us. Her words hung in the air, foreign and sharp, slicing through the evening like a blade. "Clara," I said finally, my voice low, "do you realize what you're asking?" She nodded, but her expression was pleading. "I know it sounds crazy, but this isn't about replacing you, Aiden. It's about me. About finding out who I am. I feel stuck, and I don't want that to hurt us. Hurt us." "You think this won't hurt us?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You think this is something I can just agree to and everything will be fine?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But I need to try. I can't keep feeling this way." I pushed my chair back, the scrape of it against the stone patio jarring in the quiet. "I need some air," I muttered, walking inside without waiting for her to respond. In the silence of the kitchen, I gripped the edge of the counter, my mind reeling. The woman I had built my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was asking me to shatter everything we had built together in the name of self-discovery. When I finally returned to the patio, Clara was gone. The candles had burned low, the air thick with the scent of melting wax and basil. I stood there, staring at the empty chair across from mine, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what we were about to lose. Life with Clara felt like a series of perfect snapshots, each more beautiful than the last. I often thought about the day I proposed, a crisp October morning atop Blue Ridge Mountain. The leaves had turned to gold and fiery red, the air carrying the scent of pine and earth. We'd spent the day hiking, Clara's laughter echoing through the trees, her cheeks flushed from the cold. I'd been nervous, my hands gripping the small velvet box in my pocket, but when I knelt down, her tears of joy washed away every ounce of fear. She said yes before I could even finish asking, and we celebrated with a picnic at the summit, the world stretched out below us like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Our life together was like that, simple and full of beauty. The mundane became magical with Clara. We moved into a brownstone just off the main street in Charleston, its brick facade climbing with ivy. She opened her flower shop this same year, her dream brought to life with an explosion of colors and scents. I watched her thrive there, her hands always busy arranging blooms into intricate designs, her smile lighting up the shop as she chatted with customers. Our routines were as comforting as the ticking of a clock. Sunday mornings meant coffee on the patio, the paper spread between us as sunlight spilled across our table. Weeknights, we'd cook together, Clara humming softly as she chopped vegetables and I manned the stove. She had a knack for making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. A habit of slipping a flower into my jacket pocket or pressing a kiss to my temple as I worked late on architectural designs. But lately something felt off, like a single sour note in a symphony. It was subtle, the kind of thing you could ignore if you weren't paying attention. Clara seemed preoccupied, her usual lightness dimmed by a heaviness she didn't explain. One evening I found her standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window into the yard. The twilight cast a soft glow on her face, but her eyes were distant. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She turned, startled, and offered a small smile. "Just thinking. The shop's been busy this week. I'm a little tired, that's all." "Exactly. You've been quiet," I said, stepping closer. "You know you can talk to me, right?" "I know," she said, brushing my arm lightly as she passed me. "I'm fine, Aiden, really." But she wasn't fine. I knew it. I saw it in the way her laughter didn't linger like it used to, in how she avoided my eyes when I asked about her day. There were late nights at the shop that didn't add up, mornings where she seemed lost in thought, even as we sipped coffee side by side. At first I told myself it was just stress. Running a small business wasn't easy, and Clara poured her heart into every bouquet she crafted. But the part of me that worried, really worried, began to grow louder. I caught myself looking for signs of what might be wrong: the missed kiss before leaving the house, the tension in her shoulders as she curled up on the couch. She kept bossing me off, with promises of more and worst-case scenarios. "You're working too hard," I said one evening as she sat at her desk, flipping through invoices. "You should take a day off." She shook her head. Clara glanced up and smiled faintly. "There's too much to do. Valentine's Day is coming up, and you know how crazy it gets." "Let me help," I offered. "I can do the books or run deliveries, whatever you need." She shook her head. "You've got enough on your plate, Aiden. Don't worry about me. I've got it under control." She said the words with conviction, but the look in her eyes told a different story. There was something she wasn't saying, a weight she was carrying alone. I wanted to press her, to dig deeper, but I hesitated. Our marriage had always been a partnership built on trust, and I didn't want to overstep. "Hey," I said, kissing the top of her head. "But let me know if you need anything." "Will," she promised, her smile softening. For a while I convinced myself that was enough, that if there was something truly wrong, Clara would come to me. We had weathered every storm together, hadn't we? I thought back to the time when her shop first opened, and she feared no one would walk through the door. I had spent weeks helping her repaint the walls and stock the shelves, reminding her that her talent would shine through. It had. People came, and her business flourished. Still, whatever was bothering her now, I told myself, was just another passing cloud. Our love was indestructible. It had to be. But as I lay awake beside her that night, listening to the even rhythm of her breathing, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Something was changing, slipping just out of reach, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on to it, I couldn't. The dinner table was set with quiet care, the kind of effort Clara always made for our evenings together. A bottle of Merlot stood half-empty between us, its deep red casting shadows across the crisp white tablecloth. She had cooked her favorite pan-seared salmon with roasted asparagus and lemon, but tonight the food felt like an afterthought. Clara barely touched hers, cutting it into neat, untouched pieces as if stalling for time. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched thin between us. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd fell in love with, warm, genuine, open. But her gaze quickly dropped back to her plate, her fingers tracing the edge of her fork. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about," she said, her voice quiet but steady. The air shifted. My grip on the stem of my wine glass tightened, and the unease that had been simmering for weeks began to boil. Clara took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with an effort that felt heavier than the moment called for. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly, as though she had rehearsed them, but still wasn't sure how they would land. She pursed her lips, looking for the other slave girl. "I love you, Aiden," she began, her voice trembling. "You're my best friend, and I couldn't imagine my life without you. But lately, I've been feeling like something's missing." My heart sank, though I forced myself to stay calm. "Missing? Clara, what do you mean?" She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a vulnerability that made it impossible for me to be angry. "I feel like I've lost part of myself along the way," she said. I nodded slowly, though her words felt like a foreign language. "I think so," I said, even though I didn't. She hesitated, searching my face for some kind of reassurance. When she found none, she pressed on. "I've been thinking, maybe it would help if we explored things separately. Separately, my voice betrayed the edge of disbelief I couldn't suppress. Ish. I mean, if we opened our relationship, she said quickly, as if saying it faster might make it less painful to hear. Just for a while, to figure things out. I think it could help me. Help us. Grow. I stared at her, unable to speak. The words hung between us like smoke, thick and suffocating. Clara shifted uncomfortably, mistaking my silence for disapproval. It's not about not loving you, she added, her tone urgent now. I do love you, Aiden. That hasn't changed. But I need to find myself again, and I don't know how to do that without this. David stared at her, uncertain, suddenly buried in the worries he felt. Without what? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Without me? The scold watched me curiously. No, she said, shaking her head vehemently. That's not what I'm saying. I want us to stay together. I just think... You think seeing other people will make us stronger? I interrupted, my tone incredulous. She flinched, but didn't look away. I don't know, she admitted. I just know I can't keep feeling this way, like I'm stuck in a life I don't fully understand. The words hit like a blow to the chest. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of how fragile the ground beneath us had become. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, the candlelight flickering between us like a weak heartbeat. Clara, I said slowly, forcing myself to breathe. Do you have any idea what you're asking me to do? Her hands gripped the edge of the table as if to steady herself. I'm asking you to trust me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. To give me the space to figure out who I am, without losing what we have. And what exactly do we have if you're out there? What, dating other people? It's not about dating, she said, her frustration finally surfacing. It's about connection, self-discovery, growth. I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to me. Growth, I repeated. Clara, do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to break everything we've built because you're having some kind of existential crisis. It's not breaking anything, she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's building something better. She smiled at me. I pushed my chair back and stood, the scrape of wood against tile jarring in the silence. I need some air, I muttered, walking toward the patio door. Aiden, wait. But I didn't stop. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside. I paced the length of the garden, my thoughts spiraling in every direction. How could she even suggest this? The woman I'd built my life with, the one I trusted more than anyone, was asking me to open a door I couldn't imagine closing again. And yet beneath the anger there was something else, a flicker of doubt, of guilt. Had I missed something? Had I been so caught up in my work, in our routines, that I hadn't noticed her slipping away? By the time I returned inside, Clara was still sitting at the table, her head bowed. She looked up as I entered, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to hurt you. Well, you did, I said, my voice flat. She flinched but nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. Can we just talk about it? Not now, but later. Please, Aiden. I don't want to lose you. Her words were earnest, but they felt like ashes in my mouth. I couldn't respond, not without saying something I'd regret. Instead, I walked past her, the weight of her confession settling into my chest like a stone. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the photo of us from our wedding day on the nightstand. The way she had looked at me then, so full of love, of certainty, felt like a lifetime ago, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if we'd ever find our way back to that moment. The days after Clara's confession felt like navigating an endless fog. Each step forward weighted with uncertainty. She didn't bring it up immediately again, as if giving me time to process. But even in her silence, the tension was palpable, lingering in every shared glance and unspoken word. I tried to bury myself in work, poring over designs and site plans until the lines blurred. But every time I walked through our front door, the questions loomed large, waiting for me. How could she ask this of me? What would happen to us if I said no? One evening, Clara finally broke the silence. She sat across from me at the dinner table, her fork abandoned on her plate, her expression a mixture of guilt and determination. "We can't keep ignoring this, Aiden," she said softly. Ignoring it? That was all I wanted to do. But I met her gaze, steeling myself. "What do you want me to say, Clara? That I'm fine with it? Because I'm not. I'm not fine with any of it." Her face fell, but she didn't look away. "I'm not asking you to be fine with it," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm asking you to try to understand. This isn't about loving you any less. It's about figuring out who I am, so I can love you, and myself, more." Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "How does being with someone else make you love me more?" I asked, my voice sharp. "It's not about someone else," she insisted, but the words rang hollow. "It's about me, about growing, about finding the parts of myself I feel like I've lost." When calmly, "And you think this is the only way?" She didn't answer, and her silence said more than words ever could. I slept on the couch that night, unable to face the weight of her request in the quiet intimacy of our bed. The next morning, I called Nate. My older brother had always been my sounding board, the one person I trusted to give it to me straight. We met for coffee at a cafe downtown, and as I spilled the details, his expression shifted from shock to disbelief. "She wants to open the marriage?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I nodded, staring into my untouched coffee. "She says it's not about me, that it's about her needing to grow." "Sounds like a load of crap to me," Nate said bluntly. "No offense, but it's a selfish move, Aiden. She's asking you to destroy your marriage just so she can go find herself? That's not how it works." "I don't think she sees it that way," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Nate leaned forward, his gaze serious. "Look, I get that you love her. But love doesn't mean giving someone a free pass to trample all over your boundaries. If you say yes to this, it's going to change things forever, and not in a good way. So you commit."
"I'm there."
I rubbed my temples, the weight of his words settling heavily. "I don't know what to do, Nate. If I say no, I might lose her. But if I say yes, you'll lose her anyway," he finished, his tone firm but not unkind. "Or worse, you'll lose yourself." The conversation stayed with me, echoing in my mind as Clara continued to press the issue in the days that followed. Her approach was softer now, less demanding but no less insistent. She would bring it up in quiet moments, on the couch after dinner, during a drive to the store. Her voice full of emotion, her words carefully chosen. "I just need you to trust me," she would say. "This doesn't have to change us. It can make us stronger." But it was changing us. The Clara I knew, the Clara I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, felt like a stranger. And the Aiden she wanted me to be, the one who could accept this without question, wasn't someone I knew how to be. One night, after hours of back and forth that left us both emotionally drained, I gave her an answer. "Fine," I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "If this is what you need, then fine." Clara's eyes filled with tears and she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. But I didn't feel gratitude. I felt like I had just handed her the first brick to dismantle everything we'd built together. That night, as I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing. That maybe, just maybe, Nate was wrong, that this could somehow work. But deep down I knew. This wasn't a compromise. It was a surrender. And I wasn't sure either of us would survive it. The first time I noticed Leo, he was standing in the corner of Clara's shop, looking at a bouquet of white lilies as if it held the secret to life itself. He had an air about him, something magnetic, a quiet intensity that drew people in. His dark hair was tousled, as if he had just rolled out of bed, and his eyes, deep and brown, had the sort of mystery that could easily make a person want to dive deeper. But I didn't think much of it at first. Clara had plenty of customers, many of them charming in their own ways, all of them making small talk while admiring her arrangements. But then Leo started coming by more often. At first it was subtle, just a visit here and there, a compliment on the flowers she'd been working on. "These roses," he'd say with a smile that barely reached his eyes. "They remind me of something I can't quite place." Clara would smile back, a soft, almost wistful look crossing her face. She seemed to like his attention, the way he lingered a little longer than necessary, just to admire her work. Had pretended not to notice, pretended that there was nothing unusual about it. But it was impossible not to feel the shift. One evening I stopped by the shop after work, hoping to surprise Clara with a quiet dinner, just the two of us. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and I saw them right away. Clara and Leo standing by the counter, their heads leaning in together, laughing at something Leo had just said. Clara's laughter, once a rare and precious sound between us, rang out easily, unburdened. She looked beautiful, her face lit by the soft glow of the shop's lights, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who had once looked at me the way Leo was looking at her. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart sinking. I didn't know what I was expecting when I walked in. Maybe to find Clara smiling just as she always did. But this felt different. The connection between them was palpable, and it took everything in me to smile and greet them without letting the hurt show. "How they, babe," I said, forcing the words through a tight throat. Clara looked up, a bright smile crossing her face. "Aiden, I didn't know you were coming by." Leo offered a polite nod, but his eyes lingered on Clara just a moment too long, as if trying to catch her gaze before she shifted her attention back to me. It was subtle, but I felt it. A distance I couldn't explain. A quiet space that had crept between us. I wanted to stay, to say something, but the words caught in my throat. So, I did what I always did when I didn't know how to confront the truth. I retreated. "I was just thinking we could grab some dinner," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just the two of us." Clara hesitated for a second before nodding. "That sounds nice," she said, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt? Relief? I wasn't sure. Leo excused himself with a smile that felt too familiar, like a silent acknowledgement that whatever had just passed between him and Clara was theirs alone. He left the shop with a lingering glance, and I watched as Clara's eyes followed him until he disappeared down the street. The drive to dinner was awkward, the silence between us stretching until it felt suffocating. Clara stared out the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the pattern on the dashboard. "You've been spending a lot of time with Leo lately," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He glanced at me, surprised by the question. "He's just a customer. He comes by for inspiration sometimes." I nodded, but I didn't believe her, not fully. The way they interacted, the way she seemed to come alive when he was around. It wasn't just a customer-artist relationship. There was something more to it, and as much as I hated the thought, I couldn't ignore the growing pit in my stomach. In the days that followed, Leo's visits became more frequent. Clara would talk about him in passing, his art, his latest project, the way he seemed to understand her in ways I hadn't even tried to. She mentioned him during dinner one evening, her eyes lighting up as she described a conversation they'd had about color theory and light. I smiled, nodding along, but inside my chest felt tight, the familiar ache of something slipping away too fast. "What do you want from me?" By now, the quiet distance between Clara and me had widened. She was no longer the woman I'd known so intimately, the woman who would talk about her day while I cooked, the one who would hold my hand during quiet moments. She had withdrawn, becoming a version of herself that I didn't fully recognize. I tried to fill the void with work, pouring myself into projects that piled up at the office. At least there, I could control things. But no matter how many hours I spent at the drafting table, no matter how many late nights I spent revising designs, the gnawing emptiness at home never left. I could feel Clara's absence, even when she was in the same room. The conversations were forced now, our routines disrupted by her growing focus on the shop, on Leo. Every time I asked about her day, she would brush me off with vague answers, her eyes always elsewhere. She was slipping away, and I was helpless to stop it. It wasn't long before I started staying at the office longer, skipping out on dinner altogether. I told myself it was because I needed to finish a proposal or make sure everything was perfect for a new project. But the truth was, I didn't want to face her. I didn't want to hear about Leo, didn't want to see the way she lit up when she talked about him. Clara, in the meantime, seemed content to let the silence stretch between us. Every now and then, I'd catch her staring out the window, her fingers absently toying with the hem of her shirt. It wasn't the silence of comfort anymore. It was the silence of something breaking. Ever since we arrived, her body had been tighter, her mind more prone to self-harm. I still didn't confront her. Instead, I sank deeper into my work, telling myself that time would heal the rift between us. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. The more I pretended not to notice, the more I saw. And every day, Clara pulled just a little bit further away from me. The discovery was almost accidental. I had come home late, exhausted from a grueling week of deadlines and meetings. Clara's car was parked out front, the lights inside our house dim, save for the faint glow of the living room lamp. I figured she had probably already gone to bed, though I hadn't heard her come in. The quiet was unsettling, and my steps felt heavier as I entered the house, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the stillness. I wasn't looking for anything. I told myself I just needed to check the mail and maybe grab a drink before calling it a night. But as I passed by Clara's phone on the coffee table, I saw its flashing with a new message notification. Kaimar. It was an innocuous enough thing at first, a name I didn't recognize. Leo. I didn't think much of it. She mentioned him often enough, though I always felt a pinch of jealousy when she did. But I couldn't help myself. I picked up the phone, just for a moment, just to see what was going on. New homestead, new cottage, extraordinary life, new people. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the thread of messages. More than I expected, and more intimate than I ever could have imagined. The first few messages were innocuous enough, innocent by most standards, but as the conversation progressed, the tone shifted. Leo, I miss you. When can we see each other again? Clara, soon, but I need time, Leo. I don't want to hurt Aiden. Merrily. Leo looks mildly. Leo, He won't understand. He never will. Exercising, he said. Clara, I know, but I can't go back. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. You make me feel alive again. Eleanor said to Clara. I felt sick. My mind raced as I scrolled further, unable to stop myself. It wasn't just flirtation. It wasn't even just an affair. These weren't the words of a woman grappling with guilt. They were the words of someone who had already crossed a line. Someone who had already given a piece of herself to another person. And it wasn't just physical. The emotional weight of it was suffocating, like I had been buried under the rubble of everything we had built. I didn't know what to do. I felt paralyzed, my mind a blur of disbelief and rage. This was the betrayal I had sensed, but never wanted to acknowledge. I had given Clara everything, trusted her completely, and in return, she had given herself away to someone else. Not just to Leo, but to the idea of escaping from me. From us. The phone dropped from my hands as if it were a live wire, the sound of it hitting the coffee table like a thunderclap. I stared at the screen for a moment longer, my breath shallow, my thoughts swirling. I had to confront her. There was no choice. The lies, the secret, it all shattered in an instant. I found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back turned to me as I entered. She hadn't heard me approach, and for a moment, I almost let it all slip away. I could pretend, for just a second, that everything was normal, that this was a bad dream. But the phone on the coffee table, the messages from Leo, they were real, and I had to face them. Oh, I want them gone. I need them left. I'd hate to face them. Clara, I said, my voice rough, barely above a whisper. She turned then, the surprise in her eyes quickly replaced by a flicker of apprehension. She saw my expression, the look of betrayal carved into my face. Her mouth parted, but she didn't speak, didn't move. You need to explain this, I said, my voice shaking as I reached for her phone. I threw it on the bed between us, the screen still glowing with the last message. Gotcha. No. Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. For a moment she was silent, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. Hayden, it's not what you think, she began, her voice pleading, but there was no convincing me now. Not what I think. I cut her off, my heart pounding in my chest. You've been texting him, Clara. You've been seeing him behind my back. You make me feel alive again. You make me feel alive again. I repeated her words, the pain in them sinking into my bones. And you thought I wouldn't find out? She took a deep breath, gathering herself, her eyes not meeting mine. She opened her mouth, her voice faltering, but she continued, her words coming slower now. It's part of the agreement, Aiden. I told you I needed to grow, that I needed to find myself. This was the only way. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Part of the agreement. This was what she'd meant all along. I had agreed to it. I had reluctantly agreed to give her the space she wanted, but I had never imagined it would come to this. To her choosing someone else. Not like this. Not in this way. You think this is growth? I said, my voice rising now, the anger breaking through. This is betrayal, Clara. You've crossed a line that we can't come back from. She stood then, her face flushed with guilt and regret. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you, but I felt so empty. And Leo, he made me feel something I haven't felt in so long. You felt empty? I asked, my voice cracking. You felt empty while you were with me? While we were building a life together? Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. I've given everything to you, Clara. I said, stepping back, feeling the weight of every word I had said to her over the years. The promises, the love, the trust. And now it felt like they had all been nothing more than words. And you've given it all away to him. This isn't just about a mistake. This is about you turning your back on us. The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken truths. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding, but I was too far gone. The betrayal had already carved a permanent scar between us, and no amount of words could undo what had been done. After a moment, she sat back with a weary sigh. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't stay with someone who doesn't value what we had." And just like that, everything changed. The night I left felt like the world had been stripped of color, like a vibrant painting had been torn from the wall, leaving only a hollow frame in its place. I don't remember packing my things, clothes, toiletries, the few belongings that had meant so much to me over the years. I moved mechanically as if my body was on autopilot, and yet my mind was consumed by the gnawing ache of everything falling apart. Clara wasn't there when I left. I had expected her to be, to say something, anything. But when I walked into the empty house, there was no one waiting to stop me. No apologies, no tears. The silence screamed louder than any words could have. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Charleston, a place far enough away to escape the constant reminders of our life together, but close enough to keep the city's pulse within reach. The apartment was small, only one bedroom with a narrow kitchen and a view of a graffiti-covered brick wall. It was nothing special, but it felt like a refuge, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts, away from the weight of Clara's betrayal. Clara, the first few days were the hardest. I barely slept, pacing the room like a caged animal, replaying the same arguments, the same conversations over and over in my mind. How had I missed it? How had I allowed it to go on for so long without seeing what was happening? I couldn't escape the echo of her voice, her words about growth and finding herself. The truth of what she had done gnawed at me, and I couldn't stop the flood of bitterness that surged through my veins, and I started going through the motions of everyday life, cooking simple meals, working from home, cleaning the sparse apartment. But I felt numb, disconnected from everything. It wasn't until I found the old camera buried in a box of forgotten things that I felt a spark of something resembling hope. Photography had been my escape when I was younger. It was the one thing I loved more than anything else, a way to capture moments, to freeze them in time. But over the years, I'd let it slip away, buried under the weight of responsibilities and the hustle of life. Now, with everything in my life shattered, it felt like the only thing left that still had meaning. There were still so many I'd missed that stuck with me over the years, from my training with Telmarin. I pulled the camera from its case, dusting off the lens. It felt strange in my hands, but also familiar, like reconnecting with a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. I wandered the streets of Charleston, looking for anything worth capturing. Shadows playing across cobblestone streets, the golden light of sunset spilling over rooftops, the quiet elegance of old buildings standing stoically against the test of time. I didn't know what I was looking for, but with each shot, I felt a small piece of the weight lifting. Photography became my meditation, my quiet refuge in a world that felt overwhelmingly loud and painful. I am looking for as much light as I. One afternoon, as I set up my camera near a park bench, I noticed someone else with a camera, standing a few yards away, framing a shot of a passerby. She was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration, her camera held with the practiced ease of someone who had done this for years. Her hair was dark, pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore a faded denim jacket and jeans that were worn just enough to show they had stories of their own. There was a quiet intensity about her, and for a moment I wondered if she, too, was escaping from something. I couldn't help but watch her for a while, captivated by the way she moved, the way she looked at the world through her lens. Eventually, I took a deep breath and walked over, my camera slung over my shoulder. "Nice shot," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice cracked slightly as I spoke. Lula fixated herself on my face, forming a super skull around my eyes. She turned toward me, a small smile curving on her lips. "Thanks. I'm Mia," she said, extending her hand. "You look like you've got a good eye yourself." "I'm Aiden," I replied, shaking her hand, feeling a strange pull toward this stranger in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I used to do this more, before life got in the way. "Yeah, I get that," she said with a knowing look. "Life has a way of pushing the things we love to the side, doesn't it?" We spent the next few hours walking around the park together, sharing tips and stories about photography. She told me how she had picked up her camera again after a long break, trying to rediscover her passion after a personal loss. Her words mirrored my own in some ways, and it felt like she understood what I was going through without needing to hear all the details. Mia was easy to talk to. Her presence was calming, and with every moment I spent with her, I felt a little more grounded. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was just there, offering a kind of companionship that I hadn't realized I'd been craving. It was comforting in a way that didn't feel forced. Before we parted ways, Mia offered me her number. "Maybe we can go on a photo walk again sometime. I think you've got a good eye, Aiden. I'd like to see what else you've got." He agreed, not knowing what would come of it, but grateful for the simple connection. It wasn't anything romantic. Not yet, anyway. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like there was someone in my corner, someone who wasn't wrapped up in my past, someone who could help me rediscover a part of myself I thought I'd lost. Trek's face contorted in pain, and he screamed out, his lungs pumping so hard his reactive cells had pumped into the hard ground. In the days that followed, we met up regularly, exploring the city through our lenses, sharing stories and even laughing, something I hadn't done much of since leaving Clara. Photography became more than just an escape. It became a way to reconnect with life, to remind myself that there were still moments worth capturing, still things that were beautiful and worth pursuing. People look back from this mountain, and they will have no idea who they are because bloomed once upon a time, something I hadn't done much of since leaving Clara. Photography became more than just an expression, still things that were beautiful and worth pursuing. And through Mia, I started to learn that healing didn't always have to come in grand gestures. Sometimes it came in quiet, unspoken connections, in the stillness of a photograph, in the shared silence of understanding, and in the slow, steady process of finding yourself again. I wasn't fully healed yet, and I knew it would take time, but with each passing day, I felt a little less broken, a little more whole. "I think I'm ready," I said after a moment. The days stretched long for Clara, each one more painful than the last. At first she had thought she was free to explore, to find herself outside of the constraints of her marriage. But the reality was much colder than she had expected. Leo, the man she had convinced herself could fill the space left behind, was proving to be nothing like the picture she had painted in her mind. He was unreliable, always distracted by his art, his career, and his own pursuits. Their encounters were brief, electric in the beginning, but quickly dissolving into the same empty promises and hollow words. There was an initial rush, the thrill of something new, of the unknown, but it didn't take long for the novelty to fade. Leo was often late, careless with his promises, and frequently lost in his own world. The spark she had once felt began to dim, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of loneliness. He wasn't there for her in any way that truly mattered. The conversations felt shallow, and the intimacy, once exciting, was now just a fleeting moment that never held meaning. Clara would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, the space beside her cold. She had never felt more isolated. She had wanted to feel free, to reclaim a part of herself she had lost, but what she had found instead was a life that felt empty, like a puzzle with missing pieces. The excitement of Leo's presence had become a hollow echo, and she began to realize that it wasn't what she had needed at all. As the weeks passed, the guilt settled in like a heavy fog. Clara started to look back at the life she had shared with Aiden, remembering the steady love he had always given her. The way he had stood by her during the toughest times, the way he had encouraged her when she doubted herself, how he had been her anchor. He had loved her without hesitation, without asking for anything in return except her heart. The stability he had provided, the trust they had built, it was something she had taken for granted, something she never fully appreciated. Until now. The realization hit her harder than she expected. She missed him. She missed us. The quiet evenings they had spent together, the way he would cook dinner while she arranged flowers, the shared smiles and inside jokes, the life they had created together, simple and filled with a kind of peace she had never known with Leo, felt like a dream she had lost. But guilt held her back. It shackled her, keeping her from picking up the phone, from reaching out to Aiden. She knew she had broken something between them, something that couldn't be easily fixed. She had crossed a line that had torn apart their trust. She had betrayed him, not just physically, but emotionally, in ways that were far more difficult to repair. The weight of her actions made her feel like she wasn't worthy of his love, of the life they had built. How could she face him after everything she had done? She couldn't. Still, she found herself staring at his number on her phone, her finger hovering over the call button, her heart racing with the desire to hear his voice again. She longed for his reassurance, for the warmth of his embrace, but fear gripped her tightly. What if he hated her? What if he had already moved on, found someone who could love him the way he deserved? Sorrow. Every night she spent alone, Clara grew more aware of the emptiness she had created for herself. Leo was distant, his attentions fleeting, his charm masking his inability to truly connect. He had never understood her the way Aiden had. He had never made her feel seen, truly seen, the way Aiden had. With Leo, there was always something missing, a part of him that remained locked away, and it left Clara constantly yearning for something more. But it wasn't just Leo's inability to fulfill her needs that made Clara yearn for Aiden. It was the realization of how good he had been to her, how he had loved her with patience and understanding, how he had been her partner in every sense of the word. Aiden had always been there when she needed him, not just in the easy times but in the tough ones too. He had supported her dreams, believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, and loved her unconditionally. What they had shared was something rare, something real, and Clara couldn't help but mourn the loss of it. But then there was the guilt again, choking her from the inside out. How could she expect Aiden to ever forgive her? How could she ask him to take her back after everything she had done? She had asked him to accept a request that had crushed the foundation of their marriage. She had taken advantage of his love and trust, and now she was left to deal with the consequences of her actions. How could she ask her to take her back after everything she had done? She had no choice. And so Clara remained silent. She kept her distance from Aiden, avoiding places where she might see him, avoiding any reminders of the life they had once shared. She tried to convince herself that she didn't need him, that this was just part of the journey, but deep down, she knew it wasn't true. She missed him with a desperation that cut through her every waking moment, and as the days wore on, the realization settled deep within her. She had lost the one person who had ever truly seen her, who had ever truly loved her, and the days until her murder had been hell, along with the former deputy sheriff of Harrington County. But it was too late now. She had pushed him away and there was no going back. The guilt was too overwhelming, and the thought of trying to rebuild the shattered pieces of their life together seemed impossible. All she could do now was live with the weight of her choices, hoping that one day she might find a way to forgive herself. The decision wasn't easy. It felt like a jagged stone lodged deep in my chest, one that I knew I had to remove, but the act of doing so would tear me open. For weeks, I had struggled with the idea of moving on, of accepting that Clara and I were no longer the couple we once were. But each day that passed only made it clearer. The foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and there was no rebuilding it. I had tried to hold on to what we had, to salvage whatever fragments of love we could still find. I had clung to the hope that time might heal the wounds, that maybe the distance between us could be bridged with enough effort, with enough apologies and understanding. But as the days stretched into weeks, it became undeniable. The trust was gone. The connection we once shared, the thing that made us us, was lost. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I couldn't keep waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. So I made the hardest decision I've ever had to make. I contacted a lawyer. Sitting at my small kitchen table, the divorce papers sat in front of me, cold and final. My hand trembled as I signed them, my pen scratching across the paper as if I were sealing my fate. There was no turning back now. I was ending something I had thought would last forever, something I had poured my heart into. But in the end, there was nothing left to salvage. Not after what Clara had done, not after the distance between us had grown so wide that I could no longer reach her. I sent the papers off, my heart heavy but resolute. I knew I had to do this for myself, for my own sanity, for my own peace. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what we once were, pretending that everything could go back to normal. The finality of it settled in, and I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the empty space where her things used to be. The absence of her presence somehow louder than any argument we'd ever had. But then came the knock on my door. A princess raced into my office. It was late, the kind of hour when you're already too tired to deal with anything, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she was. Clara, standing on the other side, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying for hours or maybe days. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, can we talk?" I stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, the weight of the last few months crashing down on me all over again. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to shout at her, to ask her how she could betray me, how she could do this to us. But instead, I just let her speak. "I know what I did," she continued, her voice trembling, "and I've been so stupid, so stupid. I never meant to hurt you, Aiden. I love you. I always have. I set my mind to control my emotions and said my prayers and then chose not to do that. I made a mistake and consequence undertaken. It's over." Her words felt empty now, like a ghost of what they used to mean. I had heard them before, in different forms, in different moments of regret. But this time, I didn't feel the warmth of love when she said them. I didn't feel the comfort of hearing her voice. This time, it only reminded me of the distance between us, of the betrayal that had taken root in our relationship. "I didn't want it to end like this," Clara said, her voice now pleading. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled back. "Please, Aiden, give me another chance. We can fix this. I can fix this." I've made so many mistakes, but I swear, I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make it right." I stared at her for a long time, my heart in my throat, fighting the urge to soften, to reach for her and tell her that I still loved her, that we could find a way back to the life we had. But deep down, I knew it wasn't possible. I knew that no amount of apologies could undo the damage. No amount of promises could erase the way she had made me feel like I was disposable, like the love we had wasn't enough to hold her. Positive passion creates positive power. "It's too late, Clara," I said, my voice firm but pained. "You've already made your choice. You've already shown me that what we had wasn't enough for you. I can't do this anymore. I can't go back to pretending that everything is okay when I know it's not." Her eyes filled with tears, and she took another step forward. "Hayden, please." I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, Clara, I can't. I can't keep trying to fix something that's already broken. I need to let go. And so do you." The silence between us stretched, heavy and thick. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of desperation and sorrow. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't bring myself to say the words that might make her feel better. Because deep down, I knew that those words would only delay the inevitable. The love we shared was gone, and no amount of regret could bring it back. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." I nodded, the words sticking in my throat. "I know, Clara, I know, but this is over now." She turned away then, her shoulders hunched as she walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. I watched her go, my heart breaking in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't how I had imagined things ending, but it was the only way it could. I closed the door behind me, the finality of the sound echoing through the empty apartment. The relationship that had once felt like a solid foundation beneath me had crumbled to dust. And though it hurt more than I could put into words, I knew it was the right choice. For both of us. Always. We had reached the end. The weeks after the final break with Clara felt like an eternity, each day blending into the next, yet each one bringing with it a new, unexpected sense of clarity. The emptiness of my apartment, once suffocating, began to feel like a quiet space, a blank canvas where I could start anew. I poured myself into my photography, something that had once been a source of pure joy, but had been pushed aside for too long. Now it became my lifeline. The camera, once a forgotten relic from my younger days, had become my tool for rediscovery. I wandered the streets of Charleston with my lens, capturing the city as I had never seen it before. Every corner, every shadow, every fleeting moment of light felt like an invitation to witness something beautiful. I took photos of the old buildings, the unassuming details that were often overlooked. I was no longer just documenting life. I was embracing it, each photograph a testament to my willingness to start again, to see the world with fresh eyes. Mia had become an unexpected source of support during this time. We started spending more time together, meeting regularly to explore the city through our cameras. Her enthusiasm for photography matched my own, and with every walk, every photo session, I began to feel a bond forming between us, a connection that was based on mutual understanding and the shared language of art. We didn't talk about my past often. Instead, we talked about the present, about what we were seeing, about what we were feeling. She was kind without being overbearing, and in her presence I found a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was craving. She understood the space I needed and respected it, yet she also knew when to gently push me to open up. One afternoon, as we sat on a park bench after another long walk, she turned to me and said, "You know, Aiden, it's okay to feel lost for a while. But it's not the end. You've got a lot to offer this world, and you're already creating something beautiful." Her words lingered with me, sinking deep into the parts of me that had been scarred by betrayal and loss. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. The days grew longer, and I started feeling the weight of my past lifting, bit by bit. I was learning how to exist without Clara, without the life we had built together. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of possibility. I was free to create, to explore, to live in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in years. Meanwhile, Clara was left to pick up the pieces of her own life. The home we had once shared felt like a mausoleum to her now. She had tried to reach out after the divorce papers, but I had kept my distance, knowing that the space between us was necessary, that we both needed time to heal. It wasn't just the loss of me that Clara had to grapple with. It was the realization that she had lost herself too. She had spent so many years trying to find herself, trying to figure out who she was outside of her marriage, that in the end she had lost sight of what mattered most. The unconditional love and stability that Aiden had given her were gone, and now she was left with the emptiness of what she thought she wanted. A life of independence that had come at a great cost. The first few days after the separation, Clara had thrown herself into her work. She spent more hours than ever at the flower shop, trying to fill the void with the scent of roses and lilies, with the colorful arrangements that had once been her passion. But the long hours only highlighted how lonely she had become. The customers, the flowers, the arrangements, they could never fill the space that had once been occupied by the man she had loved. The same patience that had once been occupied by the man she had loved. Clara started to spend her evenings alone, sitting in the small apartment, staring at the photos of the two of us that still hung on the walls. They seemed so distant now, so foreign. She would trace the edges of the frames with her fingertips, remembering the moments that had once felt so real, so full of promise. But there was no going back. She had tried reaching out to Aiden once more, but his responses were brief, distant, and devoid of warmth. He had made it clear that he needed space, and she knew she couldn't demand more from him. The guilt of what she had done, betraying him, breaking the trust they had worked so hard to build, ate at her. She realized now that the freedom she had so desperately sought had come at the cost of something far more precious. Clara began to face the reality of what she had lost. She wasn't sure if there was a way back to Aiden, or if he could ever forgive her. But she knew one thing. The relationship she had with Leo was not the answer to her search for fulfillment. And now she was left to rebuild the pieces of her life, trying to learn how to be whole again without the crutch of a man or a relationship to define her. Yes, she could go on like this. As the days passed, Clara started going to therapy, trying to understand the deeper reasons behind her actions, the choices she had made that had hurt so many people, including herself. It wasn't easy, but it was the only path forward. She had to confront the painful truths about herself, about the decisions that had led her to this point. And so, in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened, both Aiden and Clara started their journeys of healing. It was hard, painful, and uncertain, but in the depths of their separate struggles, they each began to realize that the end of one chapter was merely the beginning of another. Neither of them knew what that future would look like, but they both knew that for the first time in a long time, they were free to find their own paths that hopefully would lead to peace. Years passed, and the sharp sting of that first loss began to dull, gradually replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance. The anger that had consumed me for so long faded, leaving space for something else. Understanding. I'd come to terms with the past, with the choices Clara made and the decisions I had been forced to make in response. But most importantly, I had learned how to live without the weight of that betrayal hanging over me. Sitting on my balcony one afternoon, the warm Charleston sun warming my face, I looked out at the city that had once felt like a prison after Clara's departure, but now felt like a place of growth. The streets I had walked aimlessly in those first few months alone had become familiar again, full of life and possibilities. The fear of never finding my way, of never healing, had long since been replaced by the certainty that I could thrive on my own. Photography had been my anchor through it all, the lens through which I rediscovered not just the world but myself. I had let it become a part of me again, capturing moments not to escape the past but to embrace the present. Every photograph I took felt like a reaffirmation that I was moving forward, not just in my career but in my life. My relationship with Mia had blossomed in ways I had never expected, evolving from a shared hobby into a partnership built on trust, kindness, and mutual respect. Mia was everything I had been missing without even realizing it, a person who was both grounded and adventurous, who didn't try to fill any empty spaces in my life but rather stood beside me while I rebuilt myself. We spent hours together, laughing, discussing photography, and sharing our thoughts on life. With her, I didn't need to be anyone other than who I was. She made me feel valued, not out of pity or obligation, but because she saw me, truly saw me, as I was. The love I had once thought lost forever wasn't something I had to force or rush. It had grown slowly, like a plant pushing its way through the dirt, unsure of what it would become, but determined to grow nonetheless. It wasn't perfect. No love ever is, but it was real. With Mia, I had learned how to trust again, how to give and receive love without fear. I didn't need to hide my vulnerabilities or carry the weight of past betrayals anymore. With her, I had found a place of peace I hadn't known was possible. As our relationship deepened, I realized that the journey I had gone through, the pain, the heartache, the moments of doubt, had shaped me into someone stronger, someone more resilient. I had learned the importance of self-worth, of setting boundaries that protected not just my heart but my peace of mind. I had become someone who could stand on my own, who could love again without losing myself in the process. Consciously, I turned my back and walked down the street. Clara, I knew, had her own journey to walk, just as I had mine. I couldn't undo the damage that had been done between us, and I no longer wished to. The closure I had sought for so long wasn't something that came in the form of words or apologies. It came in the form of my own healing. It came in the realization that I was worthy of love, of respect, and of happiness, not because someone else validated it, but because I had come to believe it myself. One evening, as Mia and I walked through the park, our hands brushing, I felt a deep sense of contentment settle within me. Life had not turned out the way I had planned when I first married Clara, but that didn't mean it had failed. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest growth comes from the deepest pain. I wasn't the same man I had been when I signed those divorce papers, nor would I ever be, and for that I was thankful. As I looked at Mia, her smile lighting up the dimming sky, I realized that I had found something even better than I had imagined in the midst of all the chaos. Love, in its purest form, wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about growing from it, about learning how to embrace the future with open arms and a heart that was no longer afraid to feel. This, I thought, was what happiness truly felt like. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't without its scars, but it was mine, and that was enough.